Hello my lovelies, it's Aunt Bear from Aunt Bear's Drawing Academy again. We're still with our art study of an apple. This time we are using watercolours. So here I am drafting using a 2H pencil. As you can see, the drafting is much less detailed than it was for the colour pencils. A, because we know our subject a lot better, and B, because with watercolour pencils you don't want to leave too many lines that might be visible through the watercolour. Remember, watercolour is a transparent medium. Here I'm starting on the first layer of colour. This is an underlayer, so the colours may look a wee bit odd if you think of what you are aiming at. But with watercolour, the first underlayers will effectively change the layers that come on top of it. So as you can see, there are some colours that look odd, and others you would think would be used later on. But with watercolour, you are layering sometimes the same colour on top of each other, and with each layer certain parts are getting darker, and other parts of the underlayment is a different shade that will shine through when you finish with your upper layers. Especially the blue and the yellow on the apple itself, that is part of the shadow. If you look at a shadow on a red object, you will often see hints of blue. The same with other colours. We always have an underlayment of a colour that is not the one that our eyes tell us it is. So all the underlayers are done. Putting a little bit more definition with the yellow in. Okay, now we're starting with the second underlayer level. See here, there's a little bit of brown on the blue for shadows. And we're starting to also build where we'd already put some other colours down. So shadows, I'm indicating where the darker bit of the red is on the apple, which will look almost brown. Same with on the muslin blanket. I'm putting a little bit of detail down in the shadow, because when I put upper layers down, that will just give me hints of the texture of the muslin when we look at it later. Still working on just adding hints and hints of the wood over there and the muslin blankets, the darker areas. Still working on the second underlayment. Watercolour is a quick medium in some ways, and in other ways it takes much longer than you're going to expect it to take. I'm working now on the beginning of the underlayment that is red, so the actual colour of the apple I'm now starting to put another underlayment in. So this is darker red, but a very, very light wash, as you can see. I'm starting to indicate where the lines of the red apple is as you look at it. Now remember, with watercolour, the colour that it looks like when you are painting and the colour that it will be when it dries is not the same thing. So you always have to keep in mind that the more pigment is in the water, the darker it is going to dry. If you've coloured your water very, very lightly with the paint, it will probably dry much lighter than you're expecting it from the colour that it is when it is wet. So just a little hint there. Keep in mind that you learn that as you go along. As we move back to the apple now, we are starting to put the real colour layers in. As you can see, you're starting to see definition and red and oranges and yellows being used. Always be building layer by layer so that it looks like a three-dimensional object when you are finished with it. So every layer adds to that illusion. Working on the shadow, the deeper areas of shadow on the blanket at this moment. You will see me switching back from the blanket to the apple and backwards, because as you add a layer on the apple, you want the previous layer to dry before you move on to the next one. So you switch back and forwards, so that you're not working on an absolutely wet layer on top of, because if the layer below is still wet when you start working on the next layer, it is just going to mix and become a muddy mess. So be sure that the first layer is drier than you might think it needs to be. So be slow. People will always tell you that watercolour is a very, very fast medium, and it is, but that is when you compare it to acrylics and especially oil painting. A simple apple like this in oils will take multiple days, because each time you work on it, there comes a point that you can no longer work, so you have to move on either to do something else or work on a different project while the oil paint dries enough for you to work on the next layer. So that is why oil takes such a lot more time compared to watercolours, because the layers dry much faster in watercolour. So I'm moving backwards and forwards and defining what I'm doing each time. So I'm moving in the shadow here, and you need to be very careful that when you look at the apple on the cloth, there is a shadow that is both apple and cloth, and there's a slight haze between the two. It is not absolutely defined, so you need to be careful when you do that. Now here I allowed a 30-minute little gap for the painting to dry a little bit, while I had something to drink and relaxed a little bit to come back to it. Taking a break is not a sin. You can take a break when you're working on a watercolour. So don't get too stuck in trying to finish it. Take the breaks if your body or your painting needs it. I am using white gouache as my bright points on the apple for a very good reason, in that I initially used a water-resistant latex type paint, not realizing that it had denatured and so wasn't going to shed the water anymore. So instead of being able to let the latex-like layer do the white points for me, I had to basically come back and paint it with gouache paint. It's a perfectly legitimate way of doing it. There's about 6 or 7 different ways to leave white areas in watercolours, and we will discuss all of them as we go along. At this point you will see that I'm starting to finish off each section as I work on it. I'm adding little bits of brown everywhere where the dried watercolour has shown me that the shadow wasn't dark enough, or the dark areas isn't dark enough for contrast to give the roundness of the apple illusion. So everywhere I'm now just retouching to get the depth and the colour that I want. And like always, remember to sign and date, because that way you can follow your development between paintings and be able to see how far you've come. Bye, my lovelies.